Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. It's a weekly podcast made up of a rotating group of friends who sometimes agree and often do not. Once again, I am Joe, and joining us as last week is Cody.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Cody. Got a couple new hosts with us this week who will hopefully be part of the crew going forward. We have Mr. Justin Henry,
Hello, hello.
and we have Brett.
Greetings.
Yay, everyone's here. Let's get into the show. So, one of the things that we're doing with this podcast is we're often going to be exploring pop culture. Last week we talked about Book of Boba Fett, but we want to kind of keep things open ended when it comes to the topic. And one area that many of us are interested in are things relating to the paranormal, the supernatural, cryptozoology, sort of all things weird and abnormal. And so this week we're going to be talking about perhaps the most famous cryptid of all, and that is Bigfoot. And so the topic we're going to be discussing this week is, could Bigfoot exist? Now, I personally have an interest in all those weird and out there things, but I admit that I'm not super well versed in Bigfoot personally. And I'm going to invite everyone else to just kind of talk quickly about, your personal relationship with Bigfoot before we kind of get into things.
All right, I'll go first, I guess. So, I have long been fascinated with the legend of Bigfoot, and I think that also, I don't know if it stems from my father or not, but I know he's big into Bigfoot still to this day, and we have a lot of like Bigfoot crossing signs and things in the yard at home, and he always watches the documentaries on, History or Discovery or whatever other channels they used to be on. I'm from, as Brett is as well here, but we're from kind of a more remote section in Michigan. So I think the idea that like there could be something out in the woods is a definite possibility if you look at the world over. And then on top of that, I guess just kind of you'll probably see me talk about this in a lot of episodes, but I'm just a big collector merchandise guy. So I have my Bigfoot hoodie here from back in Michigan, and I also brought along today add water to grow your own Sasquatch toy, and a postcard that I got on my most recent trip to the Pacific Northwest, which I can talk about later, but is Bigfoot Central, and
Very
even
nice.
Bigfoot Lego set. That's
Oh
right,
my.
Bigfoot Lego set.
I mean, I'm gonna speak for everyone and say that I'm disappointed that you don't have the Bigfoot in water growing over the course of this podcast. I feel like it's real oversight on your part.
Yeah, crap. It's supposed to be for my kids, but you're probably right.
What about Justin? What's your
Well,
history?
I grew up watching things like Unsolved Mysteries, later on the X-Files. Always had an interest in, things like ghosts or things that go bump in the night, because it always struck me that the world would be such a much more interesting place if these things were actually out there somewhere. But for me, as time has gone on, I've kind of shifted over to the other side of things where I haven't really seen any convincing evidence for most of those things. So I think I'm going to be a dissenting viewpoint here from what it sounds like, but we'll see how this goes.
It's okay that we're not at that part of the podcast yet, Justin. You just go ahead and spoil your position. What about Brett? Do you have any kind of interest, background in cryptids, or any of that sort of thing?
Well, I can't say that I have any, you know, large background of history in it. I do enjoy watching, those types of shows on, for example, like Discovery Channel or that kind of thing, where it's stuff about, stuff that may be out there, but there's not really any evidence, and it's just the wondering, is this possible? Could this be out there? And as Cody said, we grew up in a place where it's remote, but it's not like out in the middle of nowhere. But you are surrounded by a lot of kind of nothingness where there could be just about anything out there, and you don't really know what's out there for sure. And so the possibility is pretty interesting.
I mean, I guess you could say the truth is out there.
You could.
So, Cody, your father is a Sasquatch, as you've established.
Some people have said that about him, yes.
I mean, I feel like to a certain extent, Justin has already kind of tipped his hand a little bit.
Yeah.
Of the group here, I have a feeling, Cody, that you are likely to be the most open-minded about the possibility of Bigfoot. I mean, do we want to get into that? Do we want to talk about the history of Bigfoot at all? Where did you really want to see this going?
We can start with the history. I think so. He's an interesting cryptid here, and we'll talk about some other ones maybe in future episodes, Loch Ness or whatever we end up with. But the legend of Bigfoot, if you want to do like an all-encompassing view, I think A is worldwide, because this is something that stems from like Russia to Canada to the United States. Then you have all the variants of the Bigfoot stories, which I think are fair game to throw in here as well. When you get into like the Yeti, for example, is probably the most famous other Bigfoot style creature over by the Himalayas, but you have like the skunk mans and like the swamp creatures, and like these are recurring stories that have been told since like most recently, like the 1960s, 1970s maybe. But if you go back as far as like Tibetan culture and other things, like they have drawings and things about the Yeti from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so it's this constantly evolving legend, I think, where now you have, like we mentioned a couple times already, those TV shows where people, like, I don't want to say spend their lives, but that's kind of their hobby, their job, I guess, is they go out and they look for proof of these creatures, right?
Yeah, that is. I mean, you raise an interesting point, which is that most cultures throughout history across the world do have some form of Bigfoot-esque legend. Almost every culture has, some story of a large human-ish creature, often hairy, often, resembling what we see as Bigfoot. And I mean, you could kind of ask, is it just coincidence that so many cultures from around the world who most likely did not have any contact with, outside cultures, at least until fairly recently in world history, that, so many kind of disparate cultures would come up with a fairly similar creature? It does kind of, that's something that I feel does maybe lend credence to the idea that something like that could exist.
Well, if I may, really, when you boil it down, the most prominent features of Bigfoot, Yeti, the Yowies, whatever, whichever type you're talking about, it's their size and sometimes their hair. And if we're focusing mainly on the idea of their size, of giants, it's not really much of a stretch for any culture to have stories of things that are out there that are, big and intimidating and like us, but different. So the idea that multiple cultures, wherever they are on the globe, could have come up with, stories about giants independently isn't really that far-fetched, because it doesn't take much of a leap of imagination to imagine like something dangerous that's kind of like a human or another tribe or whatever, except just really big. That's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a teacher, and I taught psychology like 2 years ago too, and we talked about in one section what's called the uncanny valley, which is, listeners don't know, it's like that humans perceive things that are different than us as very different than us. Things that are the same as us is very similar, and they're not a worry. But when you get to something that looks very humanoid-like, very much like a person, but it's a little bit different, that's kind of where we draw our attention to it, and that's the thing that makes us the most unsettled. And I think Bigfoot probably falls a little bit into that, where he has these human-like characteristics. People are fascinated by him. Like, even take, for example, the fact that he walks on 2 legs, right? If this was a creature that walked on 4 legs, I have no doubt that this would not be as popular of a legend as it is. But the fact that he has, or they, or whatever you want to say here, has some similar characteristics to humans, depending on who you believe and whatever, with the idea of like Bigfoot families out in the woods and things of that nature. It's kind of like not too much of a stretch when you think of like evolutionary. We have the Neanderthals, right, which supposedly died out a long time ago. Well, now, like in the last 3 weeks, I've seen a news story that says they existed a lot longer than people thought. There's new scientific evidence to show that split of genealogy, or whatever you want to say, was around a lot longer than people thought it was around. And of course, we always have species that are splitting and dividing, and supposedly came from a single hereditary ancestor. And it's the idea that could there be something out there that somewhere along evolution split off into a branch of its own and has remained undiscovered for this whole time. I think that's all kind of like our fascination with Bigfoot, right? Because if you think about, like, we'll talk about in future episodes, I'm sure too, but like Loch Ness is maybe the second most popular cryptid. I'm not positive on that, but and places have their own lake monsters or sea creatures or whatever it may be. But I don't think they have the fanfare that like a Bigfoot type creature does worldwide. I could talk more about that in a second here, but I'll see if anybody else wants to chime in.
No, I mean, I think you do make a good point there. I mean, there's, you kind of briefly alluded to, there's the whole like missing link theory where some people think that, if Bigfoot does or did exist, that it could have been a branch of, human development that sort of went a different way. So that, would be closely related to us. And I think you do have a good point about how that might be why it has been so prominent and why it appeals to people, because we see ourselves in it, or at least, some part of ourselves in it. I guess that's something I never really even thought about before, but that is an interesting point.
I'll just pick up too and say, when I went recently, it was over New Year's, I was out in the Pacific Northwest, and I've been to Seattle many times, but I hadn't really spent any time in like Southern Washington and Oregon and down into California. And I knew it was going to be like the wonderful place for me to go because of the fact that like the supposed Bigfoot stories from the Pacific Northwest and all. But I was shocked even when I went out there at like how prominent it is. And yes, it's like touristy, but like they'd have Bigfoot gifts and Bigfoot shirts and Bigfoot stores. Entirely, we found a couple that were entirely devoted to Bigfoot. So it was like heaven for me to walk around and see all of the things they had out there. But like it's just so ingrained in their culture. Maybe it started as tourism, maybe it started as lore and legend in that particular area. That's kind of, I think, in the United States generally thought of as like the most prominent place that you'd find a Bigfoot. But yeah, it was fantastic for me just because it's like everywhere out there.
I'm curious. I'm guessing probably our opinions are very, very similar, but how are we defining Bigfoot? Like, what features are we defining? Is it simply,
he's got them big feet.
That would probably have to be the number one defining characteristic, yes. I mean, I would guess we're probably all on the same page that it's the traditional taller than a, significantly taller than a human, very, very hairy, and having big feet.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about basically.
features.
Is it the Peterson footage? Is that the video?
Patterson.
Patterson. I think we're basically talking about that. That's kind of the iconic supposed video of Bigfoot. But yeah, like, large ape-like, but also kind of human-like. Covered in fur, walking bipedally. Yeah, I think we're the discussion is that classical image of Bigfoot. Could that creature exist?
Yeah, I think so. And then also, a place like Florida has like the skunk ape, which is not exactly the same, but it's still kind of that like large gorilla or ape-like creature that's supposedly roaming in the Everglades or the wilderness of that area. But I think in general, that's kind of the idea behind them all is.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Yeti too, which you already talked about. I mean, it's kind of a variation of the same theme. So, Yeah, I think we can kind of lump them all together to a certain extent.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard from around the world a legend that really is very different. They're all, as we mentioned at the start, they're all pretty much the same. It's all just large, humanoid, hairy.
Yeah.
So that also kind of, as we mentioned before, that like that they're all so very similar kind of gives it a little bit of credence, possibly. Other than like hair color, perhaps is the only, defining thing that is really different from one culture to another that I've heard.
Yeah, I would say so. And then if you think about like, I guess like geography, you mentioned all these different types of ape men or Bigfoots or whatever you want to call them, but then you have like just the climate of the areas are so different, right? Like you have the Yeti and like supposedly snowlands that walks around in very cold temperatures. You have the Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, which is very rainy and usually not very warm. You have the ones in marshes or swamps, which are totally different climate as well. So if this is something that's out there, and if they are all related, presumably, then it is a species that has, in many ways, gone on to adapt itself to different regions of the world, not dissimilar to how humans have in many ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if you think about, Brett kind of mentioned the hair color, but, there are different species that will adapt to their environment in terms of camouflage. I mean, if you think about Bigfoot is classically portrayed as being kind of like a darkish brown color, which would presumably help it blend in with the forests in the Pacific Northwest where it's usually found. The Yeti being white, being in the kind of snowy mountain regions would make sense. So that's kind of interesting to think about too. I'm not as familiar with the was it the skunk ape?
Yeah.
I don't know what its whole deal is,
I
but
believe. Justin, did you have some other local legends there?
Well, I can build off the skunk ape. Usually that isn't shown as being quite as tall, but sort of a mottled coat, I think, is usually how it's shown as being colored. Very bad smell, hence the name. So the accounts of people who have supposedly seen these or run into them, they usually smell them before they see them. And interestingly, the bad smell is also kind of it's not a prominent feature, but it does show up in other Bigfoot stories on occasion. So I'm not sure exactly if it's widespread around the world, but in the US, at least, it does seem to be a common trait. But yeah, there's the Yowies of Australia, the Aboriginal sort of Bigfoot equivalent, very
Okay.
similar as well. But yeah, in general, most of the myths about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or the Yeti or what have you, they do share a lot of similar characteristics. But I think those characteristics are so general, again, that I don't think we should read necessarily too much into them, because it's like seeing, say, dinosaur bones and thinking of a dragon, or if you were in ages past. Not to say people have seen Yeti bones or Sasquatch bones or whatever and thought big human, but it doesn't take much of a leap from that starting point to get to the end product, is kind of what I'm saying. So and I know I kind of mentioned this before, but I honestly think the Sasquatch and Yeti archetype is kind of a fear of the other, something like us but different, more imposing, scarier, and harder to understand, and always out there just beyond civilization. So I honestly think that's kind of where this common thread comes from for all the various myths that we're talking about here.
That's good analysis. I wanted to jump into, if nobody has objections here, kind of more the scientific side of all this, which I think we're kind of alluding at here a little bit. Some people probably are get hung up on for their decision today. But as far as we talked about like genealogy maybe a little bit, but what about the people that purportedly have like hair and the footprint casts that are out there and the sightings that people have and the videos they've had and the photographs, etc., of that nature? Because it seems like through the years people have put together this large cache of evidence. I'll put that in quotes here. You can't see me, but I'm going to put that in quotes. And some of it has been disproven very quickly. Some of it has just been disproven later, I feel like. And then there's some that I feel like is out there that has yet to be disproven, although it's, inconclusive. How do you say it's a species we've never found at this point? But what do you make of the evidence that people have brought in supposedly belonging to a Bigfoot?
I mean, I feel like it's hard to answer that question without, revealing our feelings on the subject at hand.
Well, you already know mine. If
so
you
we
want,
already know
I can...
Justin's.
Okay.
I mean, I have to say I'm with Justin. I don't think there is really any evidence that Bigfoot exists. I mean, I've seen, some of the supposed evidence, and I feel like whatever has not already been debunked probably could easily be debunked. I do think to a certain extent, a lot of people, because of things like what you were talking about, Cody, where there's like an entire economy in some places built around the idea of Bigfoot. A lot of people like to have fun with it, and I think a lot of people just let a lot of it slide because of that. I would honestly be very curious. There's obviously no way to actually find this out, but I'd be curious to know, how many people actually do believe that Bigfoot exists, like truly, honestly believe it.
Like worldwide?
Well, I mean, even like in the US, and as far as, people, especially in these places where they're celebrating Bigfoot, or even people who host all these shows where they're supposedly looking for Bigfoot. I mean, to me, being a skeptic, that seems like a great idea for a TV show because you can keep cranking out new episodes and never have to have any payoff because it doesn't exist, but you can kind of keep the legend going, I guess. So I mean, I feel like I really want to kind of turn the question back around on you, Cody, because like I said at the beginning, I am assuming that you are the most open-minded to the possibility and probably the most open-minded to this evidence. What evidence have you seen that you think could actually be real or that might convince you that it's possible?
Well, I mean, if you're talking like in person, I'm going to say zero. But if you're talking about like what I have seen or watched or heard about, then
yeah, I mean, anything you've seen, online or wherever that you felt
yeah,
like
I mean,
couldn't
I
be
think,
easily.
well, even like through some of those TV shows or some other podcasts I've listened to or things on this topic, I feel like there's still enough evidence out there. All right, let me go about this a different way. I believe that there are a lot of people who think that Bigfoot is real because of something that they have seen or something that they have found. Of those people, I think you're going to have to cut that group down to a smaller subset of people who, are like, here's this shit I found of a Bigfoot. And like, they're like, no, that's from a bear or whatever. You can debunk that maybe a little bit easier. Or here's some hair samples. No, this is to this creature over here, things like that. But once you take away even the people you're talking about with like a TV show, I think you get down to a bottom core of people who, as you're questioning here, genuinely believe that this is out there, number one. And then I think of that percentage, you're talking a smaller percentage yet who has gone out into the woods and had an experience themselves, anywhere in the world this could be, where they believe this is what happened. And I don't doubt that they believe that this is what happened. And they maybe have seen some things that can't be easily explained by the science we have today. And so, am I to say that those people didn't see or experience what they believed they saw or felt or whatever? I don't think I can do that. Are a lot of those probably just your imagination extrapolating things or expanding things, exaggerating the size of something you might see in the woods? Probably. But there's enough stories about this particular legend that, like we said at the beginning, if this is a worldwide thing, sure, there's people everywhere in every country probably who do this the almighty tourism dollar or for the fame and fortune of 5 seconds, whatever. But I think underneath that, you probably do have this devoted community of people who believe that what they saw or what they experienced can only be explained by something like the Bigfoot legend itself.
That's fair. I mean, let me kind of take a step back here and say that I mean, I want to be Bigfoot agnostic, which I know is kind of the coward's way out. But I mean, I try to be open minded about just about anything. And I mean, this will maybe be a topic for a future podcast as well. But I have seen a UFO, like with my own two eyes. That's a story I can maybe tell another time. But I mean, having had that experience, it is hard for me to then say, well, nobody has had this Bigfoot experience, which I mean ties into what you were saying, Cody. People believe that they have had these experiences, and it's maybe hard to debunk all of them or, whatever.
Right.
So I mean, it's
to your own point then, if this episode was on UFOs and we said there's no way in hell there's a UFO, you would adamantly say there is?
no. Well, yes and no, because what I always say is what I saw was a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object.
Okay.
It was something I could not explain. Now, was it alien in nature? I'm not even going to touch on that because I have no idea. But I literally saw something, couldn't explain what it was. There were a couple other people there as well who saw the same thing, so I know I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, so I want to have an open mind about the whole Bigfoot thing. I think the thing that I have trouble with, one, as far as going back to the fact that all these different communities and civilizations worldwide have similar stories. I do think Justin is right that is probably tied to othering, which I know Cody throughout grad school and various literature classes, that's a concept that we explored over and over again. And I mean, you can even point to the fact that most civilizations around the world have a flood story or have like all of these different formational fundamental myths that we have in Western culture. And I mean, I think I don't want to step on anyone's toes who might be religious out there, but I mean, a lot of it is born of it's telling stories in order to explain things that aren't easily explained, b sort of set examples for people on ways to live their lives, things they should do. I mean, so I think Justin is right that to a large extent the whole Bigfoot thing and similar stories could be kind of like a warning, don't go out into the forest because you don't know what's out there. Don't kind of trespass where you're not supposed to because there could be something big and scary out there. To me, that just feels the most likely explanation. And I mean, as far as evidence goes, correct me if I'm wrong, as far as I know, we have never found like skeletal remains of a Bigfoot-esque creature, which to me, if it was something that existed, I would feel like at some point in history with all the, ongoing archaeological digs everywhere, and especially people who are specifically trying to find evidence of Bigfoot, the fact that we haven't found anything like that. I mean, living specimen, that's a whole other thing, but we haven't found any sort of remains. Like, to me, that's just a giant red flag.
Agreed. And on that note of evidence, we're actually kind of sidestepping another major element of this, where the burden of proof in this case doesn't lie on us to disprove all these claims that people are making about Bigfoot existing. It's if someone makes an extraordinary claim, they are the ones who have to back it up. It doesn't fall on everyone else to disprove it. And so far, the evidence I've seen, and I've spent the past few days leading up to this, digging into the most recent Bigfoot sightings that are on YouTube and trying to track down something that looks concrete. We're living in an age where I've got like a knockoff Android phone in my pocket right now. It has a 46 megapixel camera, and the best footage that we're seeing of these things, even today, either looks like it was shot through a pinhole camera smeared with Vaseline, or the person filming it was standing on a fault line. I mean, everyone has has a decent camera in their pocket these days, and no one has managed to capture a good photo, a good video of a Sasquatch, even in this day and age. It just seems very implausible.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a step back. I mean, I talked about the Patterson footage earlier. That's probably the most famous example of supposed evidence of Bigfoot existing. I mean, for anyone listening who's not immediately familiar, you have probably seen this video. It's from, was that the 70s it was taken?
67.
1967. It's the sort of iconic image of, this Bigfoot walking across the frame, looking very much like a kind of large, ape man. It's one of those things that I feel like pretty much everyone has seen at this point.
Ape woman, actually, because
oh yes, that's true. Ape
yeah.
woman. Yeah, I
Mhm.
forgot about that. Apparently, in the years since, in reviewing, they have noticed that it apparently has some mammary glands. So, as a female of the species, I mean, Cody, you're probably. I know that you've kind of you've kind of done some research into that video. Like, what are your feelings on that, and what sort of research have you read about it as far as attempts to prove or debunk it?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit, and if anybody else has any, they can chime in. I mean, like you said, it's kind of that iconic image. It's been parodied many times of like the Bigfoot looking back kind of over its shoulder towards the camera, like almost like this perfect pose for, what's going to become the iconic Bigfoot image, and the shadow that's going to be reproduced 10,000 times afterwards. But as far as what I know about it, I've heard various things. So I guess I would start with, you're in, what'd you say, 67?
Mhm.
You have no video proof, to my knowledge, and some other listeners could correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe somebody else knows here, but that's kind of the one that starts the modern day Bigfoot legend, I feel like, right? And so from there, you get into, why would these people, first of all, make this video? Is this just a fame and fortune thing? Is it that they took this relatively, at that point, kind of underground and more obscure legend? Because you recall Bigfoot wasn't as big as it is now. What would prompt them to go out and film this to begin with? Secondly, I guess the counter argument to that would be, well, why would they have this camera out in the woods randomly otherwise if they weren't planning to do this? I know there's a lot of videos that analyze and try to, what's the word here? We upscale, there you go, the images and stuff, so that you can try to get all the little movements. And they've analyzed the muscular patterns and things of that nature, and determined that, some people say it's could just be a person in a suit. Sure. Other people said there's too much like evidence as far as when the muscles move, how the skin and the hair move along with them is something that can only be natural. It can't be something that you'd get from a crappy costume, particularly from 1967. You can about imagine how great the costumes were in 1967 on top of all that. In the years since, I know there's been a lot of debate about this, because they had someone say that they were the person in the suit that was recorded that day. I know they've also had someone on record as saying that it was a hoax, that they set the whole thing up, and they have put that down in writing or whatever. But then I also know that we've had people come out that say those people are incorrect and just maybe trying to ruin the legend or get their 5 minutes of fame or whatever the case may be. So I don't know. Justin, did you have something there? You were.
Oh yeah. Going back to why he might hoax this, or why he would set this all up. So from the reading I've done, Roger Patterson had an interest in Bigfoot for quite some time leading up to this. In fact, the year prior to getting this, this footage on film, I should say, he had actually written a book about Bigfoot. 1966, do abominable snowmen of America really exist? So an easy explanation for why he might want to set all this up and create a fraudulent scene to lend credence to not only his hobby, but something he's trying to make money off of. I mean, when you get down to it, why would anyone hoax anything? It's either for entertainment or for profit. And it's been established that Patterson had an interest, a financial interest in Bigfoot prior to catching this footage or setting up this footage. So therein lies a motive for why he might want to fabricate it.
That's a good point. I mean, and let's actually take a step back in history, because the origin of the Bigfoot name is actually tied to a hoax case, which was in the 1950s. Let me pull this up here. There was a logging crew in California that discovered a set of large footprints around their work site, and this was kind of an ongoing thing for a while. And they started using the term Bigfoot to refer to the creature that they, suppose made these footprints, because it obviously had big feet. And it came to light years later that someone on that site had created basically a mold using out of wood of like a giant footprint, and used it to make these footprints around the logging site. So the very origin of the name is, a hoax. And I mean, if we can look at that earlier example, which was like 10 years before the Patterson film, people were using it as a hoax then. If Patterson, as Justin said, had an interest in Bigfoot, it would not be totally out of the question to me that he would perpetrate his own hoax in order to kind of, perpetuate the myth and get the idea out there.
I mean, I guess that's possible. And if that's his motivation, I guess it would be. I don't know. To me, I kind of flip the opposite way on that, though. Whereas if I have a hobby where I'm interested in something and like I'm trying to search for this thing, like a hoax is probably, I don't know, the last thing I'm going to attempt to do, but that's just me. I mean, I would spend my life devoted to trying to find this thing and prove that it was real. And who's to say that this guy wasn't all randomly in a spot where he was at and saw this Bigfoot creature walk by at the time? I mean, is it proven that he like made a lot of money off of this?
Well, I mean, the film is famous as to how
I was going to say, I mean, we keep referring to his name, related to the movie. So if nothing else, he definitely got fame off it.
Fame,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how much money he made off of it, but he got his name in the history books, and maybe that's all he wanted. And if so, mission accomplished.
That's a good point, I guess. I hadn't thought about the fame side of it, I guess. Fortune-wise, like, I don't know, it's free on YouTube. I doubt the guy's never his estate isn't making a lot of money off of this today, but
the guy who was with him that day, like his partner, I actually just looked that up beforehand, was he apparently his net worth currently is $13 million today. Now, whether or not that number is true, I can't verify, but because I didn't like study it in depth. But this guy so the Patterson guy actually died like less than 10 years after that. So I don't know about any of his estate stuff, but Bob Gilman, something like that.
Gilman, I think it was,
yeah. He's still alive and telling the story, and he does have attached to merchandise, and his net worth is apparently 13 million. So there was some money to be made there.
Also,
right, boys, let's invent a cryptid.
In a forest near you. Buy my new shirt. No, I'm joking. What were you saying, Joe?
I was just saying, let's make up a cryptid.
Yeah, exactly.
All
you
of
can call him Slender Man.
In high school, I drew a monster called the Seamonster. Perhaps we could
may or may not exist.
Oh boy! I mean, we're gonna get rich off this podcast anyway, so we don't even need to make up a cryptid. Start selling fond merchandise to all of our fondlers out there.
That's right. Trying to think here. Anything else on the scientific-y part we want to look at? I do agree with all of you that the burden of proof falls on the people who are supposedly finding these things. Well, okay, let me let me kind of segue into my next section I had here, which was some theories about the Bigfoot itself, what it could be. And some of your questions, like Joe, you had mentioned there's no skeletal remains, and Justin had kind of mentioned you have the burden of proofs on the people looking for this thing. So it has been theorized, and I do agree that this is like a stretch even further now in the believability scale, but
Is it a
stretch even
ghost?
further. No. But let's just say that evolutionary tree split, and somehow we ended up with the humanoid us, and then we ended up with Bigfoot somewhere else. Just suspend disbelief for me for a minute here. If they are a creature that followed a pattern similar to ours, some people do believe that this is a animal or a species, whatever you want to call it, that has an intelligence somewhat similar to our own. And if that is the case, some people I know from different things I've listened and watched believe that the reason, to answer Joe's question, why we haven't found remains, is that they will bury their own, just like a human would, for our rituals that we have. Like if you walked around our places, you don't see lying skeletons everywhere either, because we, in our culture, bury them under the ground, right? So their idea here is that if the Bigfoot is intelligent, they have a similar ritual to us. They're out in the more remote places. They bury their own under the ground, and that's why we haven't found a skeleton of them. Secondly, if they have this high intelligence that some people believe in, it would be, a lot easier, perhaps, depending on what skills or I would even want to say like biological traits they have. Perhaps they have some ability to keep their distance from people that are around them. If I was out in the middle of the woods and there were people chasing after me, I'd probably run the opposite way as well, because I'm not stupid like, an animal that's going to sit around and get shot as a hunter would find. So maybe they are capable of making these thoughts and protecting their, I don't want to say invisibility, but maybe they're good at adapting to where they're at and hiding, using camouflage and a series of skills that they have to keep us away from humans.
I figured it out. They're all living with John Lithgow.
All of them?
I mean, I think that certainly could be an explanation, what you just said. But as Justin was kind of hinting at before, especially the place where we're at now, as far as technology and just like the world in general, there is very little land in the United States that's unaccounted for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything's constantly being developed. Everything is under surveillance. I just, even if you want to use the explanation that they're burying their dead or like trying to stay away from people, it just seems incredibly unlikely that somebody would not have stumbled upon one at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could say that the increase in reported sightings is also due to what you just explained, is that we're encroaching on these areas more, and we have technology to capture things much easier, and so the increase in sightings comes from that. If you didn't have nearly the number of sightings, reported sightings, in years previous, say 7,500 years ago, when there still was a significant amount of wilderness out there.
I mean, that's true, but we also didn't have the Patterson video 100 years ago. I mean, I think that, the 1950s logging hoax and then the Patterson video put the idea of Bigfoot or Sasquatch more into the public consciousness. I mean, obviously, the more the idea is out there, the more people who might be inclined to, perpetuate their own hoaxes relating to it.
Mm-hmm. And my main sticking point on this is Bigfoot is huge. So it's not like, an endangered species of fox or something, or, something small that's easy to miss that could be squirreled away somewhere in the woods. Bigfoot is, if it exists, is one of like the largest land mammals in North America. And it possibly in various other parts of the world where it supposedly is found. If this were something like a sea creature, instead of something living on land where it has 3-dimensionality to where it can hide, like it can go down, it can go front, back, sideways, whatever, that would be a little bit more believable because there would be orders of magnitude more space for it to hide in. But being a terrestrial creature, confined to the ground, possibly trees, whatever, that really limits where these things can hide to a pretty thin swath of area. And with not just, people going into the woods for hunting purposes or whatever, but like drones and satellite imagery and all the technological advancements we have today, the idea that we haven't seen encampments of these or groups of these tribes, whatever you want to say, we haven't found burial sites, we haven't found any indication of them being around, it just stretches credulity to think that something that large can just be out there in the woods. It just seems far-fetched to me.
Yeah, you just said satellites. I was just thinking about Google Maps or the Google satellite. Like, how often do you see online people found like this weird thing on, Google Maps that's at the specific location?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are people that are constantly looking at this stuff all the time, and like nobody has ever found Bigfoot or anything related to that on there. I mean, there are literally satellites circling the Earth constantly, like, that can see everything.
So it's funny you just said that. I have a couple other points here, but
Oh boy,
I have a couple other points on there.
Cody's got receipts.
That's right. I got the checks. I'm gonna ask and cash them. Here we go. I told my kids that we were doing Bigfoot as our topic tonight, and the first thing they said to me, unprompted, was, "Have you seen the Google Maps image of Bigfoot that they found?" I was like, no, but now I'm gonna pull this up as I'm looking at it here. So there's a link here. I see it didn't take very long. There's a humanoid hairy machine or hairy beast. That
Can you share that with the chat here?
As a matter of fact, I will. And I'll let you ruminate over this while I cover a couple other points here that I just had. One is your theory of satellites and GPS and all these other things with cameras. If you look at where the legends are the most prominent for these things, they are still the areas that have by far the most either wilderness cover or lack of human activity. So if you look at the Pacific Northwest, for example, when I was out there, again, first time I had really spent time out of Seattle around that area, there is nothing. As far as you can go in any direction, there is nothing. Like, if your car breaks down out there, you're screwed. Bigfoot's probably going to eat you. That's just what's going to happen. But it would not be inconceivable for there to be something out with how big that is. I mean, the state of Oregon alone is like, I don't know how many people live there, 6? I don't know, but it's not being facetious. But point is, there's a lot of territory there that could not be explored or regularly explored, at least, by humans walking around. Or just the areas that we hiked in the trails alone, like, it was such a massive, I think we did like a half marathon one day out in the redwoods in Northern California, and like, you just don't see people. And those are on the supposed busy areas where people are hiking at the time. So if you go off trail on any direction around there, I mean, you're talking hundreds of, thousands of miles of wilderness that people are not actively in. And nor are they droning, nor are they doing all this other stuff with. And if there's forest cover, you can take your Google Maps and stick it. That's going to do nothing for you at that point, essentially. Let's go to Tibet. I don't know how many satellites we have monitoring the people in Tibet and the Himalayas. That would be a severely underrepresented area of the world in terms of actually having like a live cam watching, Mount Everest or whatever the case may be. I'm probably more dubious that there's a large creature walking through the snowy hills up there, simply because I don't know what they would eat to sustain themselves. So I'm thinking that's probably more of a problem, all things considered. But now I'll go against myself here. Justin had kind of hinted a little bit towards this, but I know one thing the skeptics often say is, beyond the skeletal remains and beyond the whatever else, if there is a species out there that has lived as long as us, longer than us, not as long as us, who knows? There would have to be a sufficient population to keep them going. And that's kind of the other side of the coin here, I guess, is assuming how long a Bigfoot lives. I don't know, but if it's mammalian like us, I assume it's limited in how long it can live for. So there would have to be enough of these things to propagate the species and keep it going.
So I honestly thought that picture that you shared with us was just going to be a guy who was clearly in a suit, like walking through downtown.
Let me debunk that thing Cody shared with us here.
Oh, okay.
So first of all, it's from 2013, and I feel like if there was, a big scientific discovery that happened 9 years ago, we would have heard more about it. Secondly, it is from a clip posted by a YouTube user called Wow for Real. And if you just Google that name on YouTube, the description for their channel is, this is not, all caps, not a quote unquote serious UFO channel.
Well, there you go.
NASA UFOs, weird lights, blah, blah, and whatever else comes our way. Relax and have some fun. And you'll also find a number of other clickbaity things that this user has posted, including supposed footage of a man on the moon from 2014. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that they're just trying to get their own 15 minutes. Also, the pictures that were linked in that article just look like shadows to me. Like even the colored one, it could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just shared another one with all you gentlemen. These are supposed sightings. Here we go. Using Google Maps. I think I see that UFO you referenced, Joe. It's right over where you used to live.
I mean, that's where I saw it. So
sadly, not joking. That's where the icon's at on the map.
Oh man, it also includes Thunderbirds. I think this is a very reputable list.
Well, let's kind of cut to the chase here. I think at this point,
I got to throw one more out.
We're coming up on an hour, so let's.
I know. I got to throw this out there as a 2-minute discussion, though.
Okay.
All right.
The people who also are the extreme whack jobs of the whack jobs also have theorized. I'm not going to say ghosts or dimensions from other beings, though I've heard those theories as well. Aliens. Is it possible they come here and observe us? What do you think?
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
Okay, so you're saying that the reason we can't find them is because they hop into their spaceships and zoom off into space, or they have like little invisibility fields, or
maybe they
just have their campground.
In their defense, no one said they're hopping into their spaceships. They could be getting like beamed up, transported into their spaceships. I'm going to go ahead and say that there's probably not much evidence to support that theory. I mean, UFOs as a whole is probably something we should talk about another time.
Sure.
So close-minded.
But Cody Fleming.
Yeah.
Could Bigfoot exist?
All right. I don't want to do this every episode, but I want to tweak that a smidge if I can. I want to put you all on the spot here on a spectrum of 0 being Bigfoot couldn't possibly exist, 10 being he does exist, and the spectrum being could there be a chance that he does exist according to that. So I'm going to give you a second to think about that while I go first, because that's what you want, Joe. I love Bigfoot. I love the legend. I think more stuff would have been found at this point. However, I do also believe that there are areas of this world where something could exist that has not been found yet. I mean, there's vast amounts of land in Russia, different areas of the world. Canada, certainly. The United States has some. There's other places as well. So I'm going to put this at a 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10. I'm going to say there's a chance.
3 out of 10.
But it's a chance.
Oh, boy. Wow. Should I go, or does someone else want to say how they feel?
I guess I go. Oh,
Justin Henry.
Nope. Sure. So,
Brett, you haven't talked much this podcast. Get it out there.
All right. Well, so I mean, I have to come about this at a from a scientific standpoint, being that's just been my natural instincts pretty much all my life, and that's my profession now, more or less. And so I look at a lot of this stuff, and you just can't. There's evidence that can't really be disproved. There's some out there, but the vast majority of it has been disproved either by its hair samples turn out to be a bear, or the footage that just is easily to just say is fake. So I have to look at this as, is there evidence that actually is concrete that can say yes? And there's very little that I've seen that can actually be substantiated. But I also have a lot of interest in sci-fi and a lot of these things that I want them to be true, and so I look at the evidence and I say, well, some of the stuff you can't really disprove, like the Patterson film, for example. I think is actually, if that is a suit, that is an incredible suit. And I think about the first thing came to mind when Cody was talking about it. A similar time frame. People actually had a budget on the set of Star Trek. Those suits were not believable, and these people with no money, went out into the woods and made a suit that, truly looks authentic.
Far better than Star Trek.
The one thing that I was watching a video and the guy mentioned, well, there's the hair is different colors in different spots, and he's like, well, if you look at it, it's the hair is lighter in areas where the hair would be worn down from natural use, from natural movement of the body. And I was like, damn, that's a damn good point. And we brought up the point of that, people analyzing the film said, wait, this thing's got it's got boobs. So my thought is, people in the 60s, two dudes if they're making a hoax video, would they have been far more likely to have made a large hulking male, really intimidating with Bigfoot? How likely would they be to make a female one?
I have to admit, I didn't even know that until today when I was doing some research, and I actually have to agree with you that struck me as something where it's like, that seems like a really specific detail to just make up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, long explanation short, I look at this as there's not a lot of evidence to really say yes. There's enough to get me interested, and so I also would put this at a 3, maybe 4 out of 10.
3, maybe 4 out of 10 for Brett.
Okay, I got to go.
Justin Henry laid on us.
Justin, wait, Justin, before you give us your analysis, Justin, I just shared with you 224 new species. They just found in one part of Asia.
Are any of them 8 feet tall?
I haven't proved them all yet, to be honest.
So, okay, I have to take a second and talk a bit about the Patterson film before I give my final roundup.
Debunk the boobs.
Actually, I was going to start with the Bigfoot boobs because in that footage, they look about as convincing as the breasts do on ancient Greek sculptures. Like someone just sliced a grapefruit in half and stuck it on the chests. They don't. This just feels like a very weird thing to be saying, but they do not look natural.
Justin Henry has a degree in primate mammalogy, for the record.
I don't, but Mr. John Napier from the Smithsonian Institution does, and he actually took a look at the film and broke down, at least in the book that I've got here, 6 different points that he says, in his professional view, are incongruous with something that physiology that would match up with a primate. The stride, I'm not. It's that much text. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll kind of try to break it down bit by bit here. Despite the fact that there were breasts prominent, he says that the stride matched up more closely to an adult human male, as in someone wearing a suit. Let's see. So the arm swinging, the steps, all to him seemed greatly exaggerated to try and make the stride seem longer, so that the creature would seem taller and more imposing. He mentions the butt, and again, I swear I'm not trying to make this sexual, but primates, a lot of great apes don't really have a prominent butt. It's more of a human feature. So in his eyes, the fact that the shape, the Sasquatch has a very prominent butt, shows that it's to accommodate the man in the suit, who also presumably has a butt. So he, like I said, there's like 6 different points here. I trust his expertise more than mine, and if he says it's a bunch of bunk, I'm inclined to agree with him. But now that that's out of the way, it is a big world out there. There are a lot of woodlands that, even with all of our technological advances, we can't see into 24/7. We can't always see through, like, you know, the canopies or the treetops and things like that. So I can't say with 100% that Bigfoot can't exist. There is, and then this is the problem that comes with trying to prove a negative, because there's always going to be a kind of a what if, or like, you can't look under every stone, you can't look in every cave. There's always the chance that maybe if you looked just around the next corner, you would have found what you're looking for. That said, I think it's very unlikely, considering the size of the creature and just how many people there are, and the extent of the video and photographic technology we have. Also, the fact we haven't found any bodies or any verifiable hair or DNA samples, bones. I'm going to rate this as like a 1 out of 10. It's possible, but very unlikely.
Also, that new monkey species I just found is apparently only 9 pounds. So
Littlefoot.
All right. Well, I guess that leaves me here. 10 out of 10. Good night, folks. No, I'm actually glad that you posed it this way, Cody, with the spectrum, because before we started recording, I actually asked a point of clarification in our chat. Are we saying, is the question, does Bigfoot exist or could Bigfoot exist? And by doing the spectrum, we're kind of addressing that. Mm-hmm. I think the Patterson video is bullshit. To me, it absolutely just looks like a guy in a suit. I honestly don't know how any right-minded person could think otherwise. It might be a fairly convincing suit, but to me, it seems like something that would have been well within the realm of possibility for that time. Also, it's really, really, really grainy. Even attempts to kind of, clean it up, it still is really grainy. So that, to me, casts suspicion on anyone who's talking about like specific hair movement or stuff like that. But like I said earlier, I do feel like I'm kind of Bigfoot agnostic. If we're splitting hairs and asking the question, does Bigfoot exist? Probably not. But could Bigfoot exist? Like even Justin, who seems to be our biggest skeptic, said, there are corners of the earth that we still don't really have eyes on, and it's anything's possible. So, and I swear to God, I came up with this number while Cody was initially talking, before he said his. But for the second week in a row, I agree entirely with Cody Fleming. And I would have to say I'm a 3 out of 10 on the Bigfoot probability scale.
I, as always, want to remind everybody, Joe's opinion does not count because he believes episode 8 is better than Rogue One. So
we'll get there eventually. Rogue One is a trash fire. Episode 8 is the best Star Wars movie.
Ate the trash fire, vomited up, ate it again, and pooped it out. That'd be episode 8, just for the record.
See, that I can agree with.
Oh.
Spoiler. Anyway, well, I guess there you have it. It sounds like we are generally in agreement that there's a tiny, tiny possibility that a Bigfoot could exist, but most likely it is probably not a thing. I mean, I do think it's fun. I think it's, I forgot to wear it, but I do own some Bigfoot, memorabilia myself. I think it's, it's a fun thing to think about, but yeah, I think we're all in agreement that the science just isn't there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any closing thoughts?
I think we hit them pretty well.
Like that's a no. Well, I guess that's another episode in the can, and shockingly 2 out of 2 for me agreeing with Cody, which is kind of terrifying in its own right.
Brings our lifetime total to 5. So there you go.
Yeah,
folks.
I mean that sounds about right.
Don't agree with me again.
And on that note, until next week, this has been Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. I'm Joe. That's Cody. That's Justin. That's Brett. some combination of us or possibly other hosts will be back next week, and we hope you'll join us then.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.